Hello, and thank you for your interest on my workshop about sexual violence and LGBTQ plus community. My name is Allie Weiland, my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a counseling center paraprofessional. So I'm an undergraduate student who's been trained in presenting topics such as this. If you feel like you would like to talk to a trained clinician, I will have more resources about that at the end of this presentation. Let's start with some general guidelines for this workshop. So first of all, make sure that you're in a safe place before starting. Some things you might want to consider are your physical environment as well as your mental state throughout this workshop. So this workshop covers sensitive topics. Obviously, it's a workshop about sexual violence. So I'd like you to take care of yourselves as best as you can. Also, this is a self-paced workshop, so take as much time as you need. You can pause this whenever you want, and feel free to skip material. We'll have a table of contents coming up, so it'll give you a good idea of what this will be covering. So here's the table of contents. Feel free to pause this audio or stay on the slide just to get a good idea of what topics will be covered during this workshop. If you see anything that you might want to avoid, you can look at the top right corner of the screen, and there should be numbers on each slide corresponding to the contents presented here. So if anything comes up and you want to avoid that, just feel free to skip over it. I also want to go over terminology before we start this workshop. So one term that I will be using is sexual violence or sexual misconduct, which I use as an umbrella term to include sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual exploitation, stalking, dating violence, and domestic violence. I will also be using the word queer throughout this workshop. I use that to describe the LGBTQ plus culture and community. I understand that some people might not be comfortable with this term, but I'm using it to reclaim it. Some goals of this workshop are to learn how sexual assault impacts the LGBTQ plus community, learning skills for how to best support survivors, developing your own community support network, and determining what self-care techniques work best for you. Let's start by going over some sexual violence statistics in the LGBTQ plus community. The most recent UIUC Campus Climate Survey found that LGBTQ plus students were 2.7 times more likely to experience sexual misconduct than non-LGBTQ plus students. In addition, LGBTQ plus students were more likely to experience gender harassment on this campus. Some more general statistics about sexual violence in the community are that 44% of lesbians and 61% of bisexual women experience sexual violence in their lifetime. 26% of gay men and 37% of bisexual men experience sexual violence in their lifetime. And the lifetime rate of sexual assault for transgender people is 47%. General tips on how to help survivors as an individual. If you would like more resources about this, feel free to go into the resource guides provided with this workshop or go to We Care, UIUC's website for sexual violence prevention. If someone is a survivor and discloses to you, please listen to them without judging. This includes believing and affirming them and not asking for additional details other than the ones that they are giving you. Remember to use inclusive and affirming language, especially related to their identities, and validate their feelings and experience. It's important to support their decisions. You might want to offer resources and help them understand their different options, but what they decide to do with those resources and options is their own choice. It's important to remind them that they are not alone in the moment, especially when they're disclosing to you, as that's a very personal and vulnerable experience, and also support them in all of their future actions and make sure that they know that you will support them. Now that we've gone over how to support survivors as an individual, let's talk about how to support survivors as a community. You know that individual support is important to survivors, but why is community support also necessary? Well, survivors in the queer community may not feel comfortable reporting to a public agency or law enforcement, so instead, community and chosen family are important sources of support systems. One reason for this is that if they do report, they may feel discriminated against from both the institutions and the workers within the institutions that are available wherever they are. So because community support is so needed, it's important to create a culture that believes and helps survivors instead of blaming them. Here's an activity for you about community support. So first off, identify your support system. So you can list people either just in your head or if you have paper or a note online, just make a list of people that you're comfortable talking with and who support you. So of those people, who would you go to for support? Who of them is a good listener, who cheers you up? Maybe there's a few people on there who always know other people or resources in the queer community to connect you to. So it's just important to know who you're connected to and what they offer to you. And then of those people, how can you best support them as well? So take a minute to reflect on your own skills as a piece of other people's support systems. Maybe you're a great listener, or you have a bunch of resources and connections, or you always have a joke for someone. Also, if you are able to reach out to someone on your list and check in with them, this can include just giving them an update on how you're doing or asking for a check-in with them on how they're doing. Maybe you reflected on your list and you found that you don't really have a big enough support network, or you would like to have a bigger one. So here are some tips that you can do to increase your support network. You might want to reach out to a student organization. There'll be a list in the affiliated resources for this workshop. You can also reach out to community organizations. So the LGBTQ Resource Center is available, as well as your local community organizations such as the UP Center in Champaign County, or various community organizations wherever you are at. If that's not available, you can also find an online community. There's many websites or through social media that you can find. And then finally, you can talk to someone or get connected to some of those other resources through a help center or hotline. Based on your need, there are people available through online chat as well as calling or texting for various organizations and hotlines. At this point of this workshop, we've discussed the prevalence of domestic violence and sexual violence in the queer community, as well as the need for a good support network. So what can we do as the LGBTQ plus community to prevent things like domestic violence and support survivors? There are many different ways the LGBTQ plus community can come together to protect against domestic violence. First of all, the LGBTQ plus community can be a space to openly discuss as well as model healthy relationships. This is especially important to people who may be new to the community or new to queer relationships, and they might not be as knowledgeable or comfortable knowing what a healthy relationship may look like in this community. So survivors might also feel pressured to have a perfect relationship, whatever that may mean, and they might be scared to tell others in the community about their relationship problems because they might feel like they have to look like they're always happy in their relationships. So just acknowledging within the community that healthy relationships can have conflict in a constructive way, and not everyone's going to be happy all the time in relationships, and that's okay. Those are important things to acknowledge within the community. And also in small communities, um, where maybe everyone knows each other, or there's just a lot of pressure from the outside majority and oppression, there might be a lot of concern for survivors about remaining anonymous within the community, or losing support from the community if they do disclose anything. People might not want to become part of a big scandal, or feel like they're breaking up the community where people have to choose sides. So it's important to create a culture within the community to really care for each other, keep confidentiality when people do disclose, and all of those things. And I also think it's really important to remember that queer folks are super resilient and have lots of strengths. The queer community and our chosen families provide a really important support system, and that can help a lot of people cope with their situations. And affirming and celebrating our identities can be a source of strength to a lot of people. Here's another activity that you can do to help express your own resilience. So first of all, I'd like you all to reflect on your own strengths and successes. This can either be within the community or in your general life. And then after doing that for a minute, pick an activity. So the first activity is to create an expressive arts piece that shows your resilience. So this can be anything creative that you like to do. Might be a written poem or a piece of spoken word poetry. Could be a collage, a playlist of things that make you feel strong and resilient, or a dance that expresses your journey. Really anything that is just expressive in the way that makes you feel best. The second activity that you could choose from is to make a list of things that make you feel empowered. This might be people in your life, role models, might be different pieces of media that make you feel strong and empowered, or bits of writing, whatever that may be to you. And the third activity option is to share a message of gratitude with someone important to you. It's important to reflect on your gratitude and your strengths, and just sharing those with the people around you can help build your resilience. Now that we've gone over all of our personal strengths and the importance of supporting others, I'd like to remind you all that it's also important to support yourself as well, and self-care is one of the ways that we can do that. While it is really important to help others as an individual and as a community, it's also important to make sure that your own needs are being met as well. That reminds me of the quote where they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're wanting to help others, it's also important to make sure that you're in a good space to help in the first place. So self-care can help that by taking care of yourself both in the moment and also working to maintain long-term wellness. And through all of that, it's important to be kind to yourself and your unique situations and needs. So while we all have a bunch of resilience and strengths, it's also a really tough time right now, especially, and just maintaining that kind of self-kindness, self-compassion is super important as well. I think that a lot of times people's first impression when they think of self-care is a lot more of those in the moment activities, like watching a fun video, which are important, but also it's important to do those activities that might be less fun in the moment, but really set yourself up for long-term success and well-being. From this graphic, they might be things like setting boundaries with other people, or putting yourself first, forgiving yourself. I know that one of the things for me that might be less fun in the moment, but really important in the long term is something like just doing the dishes. They're not very fun to do in the moment, but otherwise they'll just pile up and make me feel worse in the future. So it's important to maintain those things continually. So I'd just like you to take a moment to reflect on those different self-care activities that help your health and well-being, both in the moment and also in the long term. We've come to the end of this workshop now. Thank you all so much for your participation. If you'd like more content like this, you can follow the Counseling Center online through various social media and also at the Counseling Center website. There you can find also the different resource guides that are associated with this workshop. If you'd like to speak with a trained clinician, you can also reach out to the Counseling Center through phone or TTY, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. There will be people available if you call. Also in the future, you can visit us in person at 610 East John Street. If you like the tips for supporting others in this workshop and you'd like to learn more, you can also look at the Cognito at-risk training. So this is an online module that's kind of like a video game, and it'll teach you to recognize distress in others, talk to them about it, and connect others with the resources to help. Although it's mainly for suicide prevention training, these skills can also be just applied generally to reaching out and supporting others. So there are different modules for if you're a student or if you're staff, and also different training modules for the LGBTQ community as well as student veterans. Thank you again for your participation in this workshop. Here are some references that I used to create this presentation. If you would like more references or resources, feel free to check out the other information documents that are accompanying this workshop.